Alright, Government A students, here comes another video at you that will hopefully help you with your Unit 3 essay on the Supreme Court. The goal of this video is to help you write this essay, and you should come out of it with a solid plan of attack on what to do with this essay when you get it. The way to get the most out of this video is to have a piece of paper for some notes or a Word doc ready, and there's going to be a couple places where you may pause. And again, my goal is that you will have a solid plan of attack in writing this essay when you're through with this. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Now, before I give you the essay topic, I just want to go through a very, very brief background to the Supreme Court itself. What is the Supreme Court? Why do we have it? Clicking on this. This is a picture of the separation of powers within our system. In the United States government, we have three branches: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and obviously the legislative branch here is Congress. The executive branch is the president and the federal bureaucracy, and then we have the judicial branch, the courts, the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, district courts. The reason that we have this separation of power is because when we set up the government of the United States, the framers of the Constitution did not want to concentrate too much power in one hand, and they followed the writings of a dude named Baron von Montesquieu, and that's the guy that's in the lower right-hand corner. And Baron von Montesquieu was a big scholar who studied Roman government, and it was the Romans who came up with this idea. And the reason you separate powers, there's a balance of power. If the executive is acting crazy, if we have a crazy president, then the idea would be that the judicial and legislative branches can kind of work together to counteract the bad things that could happen out of a crazy president. Or vice versa. If you've got crazy congressmen or crazy Congress, then the judicial branch and the executive branch can work together to kind of counteract that. And that's the idea behind this. And so the first thing to understand about the Supreme Court is it is part of the judicial branch. It's the head of the judicial branch, and according to our Constitution and the way we've set up our nation, it has the full weight and power of the other two branches. So this is very much a part of our government. Let's take a look at the next slide. So this is kind of a picture of the structure of the federal court system in the United States. You know, at the very bottom we have what they call the federal courts outside of the system, which is these are the courts on the very bottom are kind of like these oddball courts, like military courts or tax court. They're special courts that are not really regional. The courts that are in the trial court bracket of this, these are the regional U.S. district courts, and what I say by regional, I mean they're set up by region in the United States, and then above them are the courts of appeals, and above the courts of appeals are the Supreme Court. Now, what is important about all of this is, remember, everything filters up. The Supreme Court gets the things that filter through those other courts. Another way to look at this, not quite as pretty as this picture, you can see the way our court system is set up. You have the district courts, and if something is appealed in a district court, it goes to a court of appeals. And then if something is appealed in that, it goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually picks and chooses which cases it wants to deal with. And they're very careful about that because they're the supreme law of the land. What the Supreme Court says is going to become the final interpretation of the U.S. legal system. There's no appeal to the Supreme Court unless the Congress decides to do something different. That's different. But as far as the court system goes, the Supreme Court is the final say on court rulings. Now let's move on to the next slide here. So I told you it was going to be a brief history of the Supreme Court, or brief background. Let's take a look at the actual essay topic. The subject of this unit is the composition and makeup of the U.S. government. You've learned about the three branches of government and written an essay on how the branches interact with each other. For this assignment, you will consider how the rulings of the Supreme Court over the years have both shaped our government and our society. The Supreme Court represents the head of the judicial branch of our federal government and has been and can be as influential and powerful in shaping our society and governments as the other two branches. In order to see how the Supreme Court has done this, take a look at the series of landmark cases by clicking on the following link. By the way, if you were to click on that link, this list will come up. This is a list of some, it's not comprehensive, some of the landmark cases that the Supreme Court has dealt with. There's a very short overview of the case here, and then of course you can click on a link that will give you more information. When you pick your 3 cases, you're going to look at this list and decide which cases you want to talk about, and then you're going to click on those links to get more information. By the way, any landmark case that the Supreme Court has ever done is going to be on Wikipedia as well. And so when you make a choice of which cases you're going to discuss, you're definitely going to need more information that is put here. But what's nice with this is it shows it all in one place. So that's where that list goes, and that is right in your assignment in OW. So let's take a closer look at the essay topic. After looking the list over, I now want you to write an essay on the following topic. Write a 5-paragraph essay explaining the role of the Supreme Court in interpreting the Constitution. Describe 3 landmark cases decided by the Supreme Court and explain the significance of this body in influencing our society and government. Now, I always try to train my students when they're given an essay topic. The very first step to writing an essay when you're given a topic is turn the essay into a question, or the topic itself into a question with a question mark. Now, in the next slide over, I'm going to give you that question with the question mark, but it's even better if you're watching this video right now to pause for a second, look at the topic, and see if you can do that. What is the question that's being asked here? And so I'm going to move to the next slide, and by the way, when I do, the first note you want to make from this video is the topic question. You're going to want to write down that question that we come up with. And again, if you're able to do this yourself, that's even better. So let's move to the next slide. What question are we being asked? Well, when you look at the topic and you turn it into a question with a question mark, the question that we're being asked here is this: how has the Supreme Court influenced our government and society? I just mentioned this is the Supreme Court of the land. The decisions the Supreme Court makes are the final decisions of the U.S. judicial system. And of course, being a third branch of our government, they're going to have a big effect on either our government or our society. You will find out, by the way, as you look at the landmark cases, some are more geared towards government and some are more geared towards society. An example, Marbury versus Madison creates the process of judicial review. It's often regarded as the most important Supreme Court case. Very, very good choice for one of your body paragraphs, because basically this was the case that decided that the Supreme Court had the power to decide whether a law that Congress created was constitutional or not. That's that gives it that power of being the third branch of government. That obviously has to do with government. Roe versus Wade legalized abortion. That obviously has to do with society and has nothing to do with government. So when you answer this, sometimes the cases are going to be more towards society, sometimes it's more towards government, maybe sometimes both. But just remember that. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I want to point something out about why we turn this into a question with a question mark. By turning it into a question with a question mark, we clarify the topic. This is an essay about how the Supreme Court has influenced our government and society. Yes, you will be talking about 3 distinct cases, but throughout the entire essay, what you're really talking about is, hey, how has this Supreme Court affected us as people? How has it changed our government? How has it changed our society? That's why that should guide you when you pick a case. Like if you talk about Roe versus Wade, yeah, that really had a big change in our society. There was a massive influence that created. And so you want to kind of discuss those things as you do your essay. The other reason that it's so important to turn the topic into a question with a question mark is you have to specifically answer this question in a very important statement that goes at the bottom of your intro paragraph that we usually call the thesis statement. The thesis statement should look good next to the question. If someone asks, how has the Supreme Court influenced our government and society, and your answer is, donkeys live a long time, no one's ever seen a dead donkey, you did not answer their question very well. Now, if your answer, on the other hand, says, if your answer was, the Supreme Court has influenced our government and society by, and then you give some reason, that's a very good answer to that question. We can see the words in the question in it. So by turning the topic into a question with a question mark, it gives us a way to test our thesis statement, whether our thesis statement is good or bad. When you're done with your intro paragraph, if you don't have at least one sentence in that intro paragraph that answers that question, how the Supreme Court has influenced our government and society, you did something wrong. So it gives you a way to test what you're doing. The next thing that you do when you go to do an essay is you go to organize that essay. This is the next step. Now, I'd said a second ago that it's good to write that topic question down. This is a great moment to just pause the whole film and write everything you see here. What I like to train students to do is to create an essay map. It was already told to us in the topic that this is going to be a 5-paragraph essay. We know that the entire essay is going to answer the question, how has the Supreme Court influenced our government and societies? We also know that we're going to need to describe 3 landmark cases. Now, how did I come up with that number 3? Well, I'll let you in on it. I knew this is going to be a 5-paragraph essay because I wrote the topic. I knew that within a 5-paragraph essay, one paragraph is your intro paragraph and 1 is the conclusion. And although I'm not super good at math, I can do 5 minus 2 equals 3. And I knew that if I'm going to have a 5-paragraph essay and 2 of my paragraphs are already busy, 1 being the intro and conclusion, that leaves me with 3 body paragraphs. So then I said, should I ask him to write about 2 landmark cases? Or, oh, maybe I should ask him to write about 3 because 3 is easy. So when you have something like this, it makes it very easy to organize your essay. Your first main point or body paragraph will talk about 1 landmark case. Your second main point or body paragraph will talk about a second landmark case. And your third main point or body paragraph will talk about a third landmark case. So that's the way to organize your essay. And this makes it very easy to write. If you've never done an essay like this before, I promise you something. When you use an essay map, it will at least half the time it takes you to write an essay. In other words, this will really quicken you because you'll know, okay, in my first body paragraph, all I'm talking about is Marbury versus Madison. That's all. I'm not going to talk about Roe versus Wade or anything else. Nope, Marbury versus Madison. I stick on it. And it really helps you to organize your essay and do a nice job. So that's why we do an essay map. And I actually learned this teaching AP students because we had to write an essay in 30 minutes and we had to come up with some quick way to do this, and that's what we did. Now, once you've created your essay map, the next thing that you're going to need to do is pick landmark cases. Here's the list. This was on the website that I saw. Again, if you go to any Google landmark U.S. Supreme Court landmark cases, you're going to get list after list after list. It's very, very easy to find landmark cases. And usually they come with little descriptions and you pick. Again, I would strongly suggest do not use that little description you find on a list as the sole source of information about your landmark case. Your essay will end up being information light. So you look at these, and what I did for my purposes for this presentation, I picked Marbury versus Madison. Again, I would very much recommend you choose that. That's the big Supreme Court case that should really go in every essay because that establishes the process of judicial review. Plessy versus Ferguson. If you're not familiar with that Supreme Court case, that established, this was one that was a ruling as a result of the Jim Crow laws in the South, and basically Plessy versus Ferguson established this precedent of separate but equal. In the South, as long as the Southern state governments were providing equal systems for black people, they could enforce discrimination. So, for example, you had a white school and a black school, and the black kids go to the black school and the white, and as long as they were providing those services, the Supreme Court said, well, you're doing those people. Obviously, we know that wasn't true because later the Civil Rights Movement changed that. And actually, the very next ruling, Brown versus Board of Education, overturns Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court does change over time, by the way. The last one I chose was Citizens United versus Federal Government. That is the ruling that basically abolished limits on campaign contributions from corporations. I did a whole movie on this on one of the darn it, I'm trying to remember the name of the video series, and I'm not. I did a whole movie on this in the video series that I have you guys watch. Why am I not remembering the name of that? But there's a whole show just on that particular ruling and how it's changed our government. So if you once you pick 3 cases, that changes your essay map a little. So here's my essay map. Main point 1, Marbury versus Madison. Main point 2, Plessy versus Ferguson. Main point 3, Citizens United. So those are going to be my 3 body paragraphs. Now let's move forward to detail. And again, what you want to do before you do any writing on a piece of paper or on a Word doc, you want to have that map filled out. So your map needs to be just like mine. You actually have to have 3 actual cases there. And let's move on to the next slide, body paragraph detail. One way to look at, you might ask yourself, what do I have to do in these body paragraphs? I mean, I know I'm going to have to describe a Supreme Court case, but what else? One way to look at your body paragraph detail is each body para addresses the topic question in a topic-specific way. Remember, your entire essay is about how the Supreme Court has influenced our government or society. So what I do in my first body paragraph is I simply ask that question in a topic-specific way. So I say, instead of saying, how's the Supreme Court, I say, how did the Marbury versus Madison ruling influence our government or society? That one, again, is going to be more about government than society. When I get to my next body paragraph, I say, how did the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling influence our government and or society? When I get to my last body paragraph, how did the citizens... So what I want you to see here, do you see how essentially in each body paragraph you're answering the topic question, but you're doing it in a very specific way? This really helps you when you write the essay, because you look at this and you say, okay, now I'm just going to talk about Plessy versus Ferguson. How did Plessy versus Ferguson influence our government and our society? So that's how that works in detail. Let's move on to the next slide here. So we're almost done. We've just got a couple more slides. The other thing that you need to remember when you go to write your body paragraphs is a good body paragraph is 7 or 8 sentences long. It begins with what's called a topic sentence. What is a topic sentence, by the way? Your topic sentence is your one-sentence answer to that question. So, for example, when I do my Marbury versus Madison question, my first sentence of my paragraph is going to say, Marbury versus Madison, the Marbury versus Madison ruling influenced our government by, and I'm going to suggest, and most likely in that one you would say, by establishing the idea of judicial review. That's my topic sentence. Your topic sentence is to your paragraph what your thesis statement is to your essay. It's a one-sentence summary of everything that is going to go into that paragraph. And it's also your first sentence in your paragraph. After you've made a topic sentence, you must do 2 things in a body paragraph. You must describe the landmark case in detail, who, what, where, and when. In other words, give me some good detail. And by the way, put dates in there. This is a history essay. Even though it's a government class, this is still history. So put some dates in there. And and another thing that you want to do, when you go to organize your essay, generally you want to put cases in chronological order. Marbury was 1803, Plessy v. Ferguson was 1897, Citizens United was 2010 or 2011. So you put them in that order. You describe the who, what, where, and when in detail. This is the stuff you get out of Wikipedia. And then next what you do is you explain how this decision influenced our government and society. You can't get that from Wikipedia. That has to come out of your brain. If I was talking about Roe v. Wade, I would give the detail of the Roe v. Wade decision, and then in the second part of this, I would explain the effect of Roe v. Wade in our society. How did this change our society, and what is different now? That comes out of your brain, and that's just and you know what? There's no, not necessarily a right or wrong answer. There's logical and illogical. In other words, if I say, well, this really didn't have any influence on our society, and I'm not even really sure why I'm putting that, that doesn't make any sense because it did. And so there is kind of a right and wrong here. Now, another thing that I want you to look at that's really going to help you here. Okay, let's say my body paragraph was 7 sentences. And I'm a big believer in counting things. 1 sentence is the topic sentence, right? That leaves me with 6 sentences. And I know that within those 6 sentences, I have to do 2 things. I have to describe and explain. Well, being a simple math guy, I go, okay, I'm going to go about 3 sentences of description and about 3 sentences of explanation. And then I try that, and I do 3 sentences of description, and I do about 1.5 sentences of explanation. I go, man, it's going to be really hard for me to finish sentence number 2 of explanation. What I do is I add 1 more sentence of description. So in that particular paragraph, I had 4 sentences of description and 2 sentences of explanation. But in the end, I still got 7 sentences. Because essays look weird when you have like a really long body paragraph and then your next body paragraph is half as long. You actually get marked down on your essay when that happens. So that's just something that you want to think of as you do those body paragraphs. By all means, count and consider what you have to do in these. Now, intro and conclusion detail. Your intro paragraph, which is usually about 5 to 6 sentences long, has to do 2 things. Introduce your readers to the topic. Our topic on this essay is the Supreme Court, and even more specifically, Supreme Court rulings or landmark cases. Basically, what you want to do in your intro is you want to talk to who, what, where, and when. What is the Supreme Court? What are landmark cases? What do these things mean? That's what you talk about. You also have to provide the thesis statement, answer the topic question. Somewhere in that intro, usually at the bottom, usually in the second part of the intro, you need to answer the question, how has the Supreme Court influenced our government and society? I say it's usually at the bottom because you should first introduce the Supreme Court, then answer that question. Now, the conclusion is simply a restatement of the thesis, or the intro. So once you've written your intro out, you're halfway home to the conclusion. Because when you finally get to the end of the essay, and the conclusion is usually about 2 sentences shorter than the intro. If a good intro is 5 to 6 sentences, a good conclusion is about 3 to 4. By the way, you don't want a conclusion that's too long. That's you adding information. That's you going off topic. You don't want to do that. You want your conclusion to be a mirror of your intro. So remember, when you get to the conclusion, you need to do 2 things. A, remind your readers what the topic was. Oh, remember we're talking about the Supreme Court, landmark cases. The reason they call these things landmark cases is because, as you can see from reading my essay, you don't say you in an essay, is because all of these courses had a profound influence in our government and society, and then you restate or remind readers what the thesis was. When you look at your conclusion, it should look a lot like the intro. It should look very similar. Okay, so these were the things that I presented to you to try to help you with this essay. If for some reason you still have questions, if this wasn't enough, hey man, I'm always here. So give me a call, send an email to me, shoot me a message on IM. I'm there. Hopefully with this in hand, you're going to walk into this with this essay map, and I'm hoping that after watching this short little video, you're feeling really confident, because guess what? You can do it. All right, that's the end of my show. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.